So like I was saying, network security, this is the same thing, it's not in my hand, but it's network security. So we got to be careful about what we do, and all of us have networks, small and large. And simply, in a very simple way, you can say what it is. I have a definition over here. It says collection of data to perform detection and analysis, which is so simple. But that simplicity, as we know in all security terms, it works out to be, one of the largest problems in all of our lives. So I have a great panel over here who we've been talking about it for some time now, and who would be, of course, happy to share what they have. So what we will do is we'll put it open for the three, and a few minutes of introductions in NSM as a practice and as what it is, just to set the ball rolling and the context in place. So, all yours, Sapnil, all yours, go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. I think before we even talk about network security monitoring, I think it's important to probably look at why. I think that's a very important element before we go into the depths of network security monitoring per se. And I think I will share some data with regards to why this is critical, why it is important. So at my company, we run a threat intelligence project where we have deployed sensors, especially in the APAC. And these are sensors which are purely passively, looking at any sort of communication, any sort of traffic that is coming into it, right? And then that sort of data is being analyzed for what is the threat about. Is it a simple reconnaissance, somebody doing an Nmap scan, or whether it is a malware that is getting deployed, right? And one of the patterns that we have seen with this data is our learning and observation for the last 3.5 years has been that aside from the fact that there is a huge chunk of threats, and just to give you a context, so we are looking at 12 to 15 lakh threats per day. So this is all the threats, right? This is also going to be threats from consumer internet connections, like consumers having infected devices and so on and so on. But if you leave that aside, there is a large chunk of threats what we are observing from autonomous systems which belong to enterprises or corporates or government institutions as well. And that is kind of shocking to see because these threats, just to give you an example, we are seeing a commodity, and when I talk about these threats, we are not looking at APT level threats detection or something of that sort. These are commodity threats, right? And just to give you one example of it, CVE 2017-0144, which is WannaCry ransomware, right? That primarily came into existence in 2017. We are still seeing that originating from enterprise networks, security companies, not only in the context of India, but even in the context of APAC, right? So I think the need for network security monitoring in the context of what we are seeing is of paramount importance, because aside from defensive controls what an enterprise network will have, or even a startup or even on the cloud, the same principles apply there as well. End of it, if there is a large-scale threats which are originating, right, there is probably a shift of approach that is required. So I think I'd love to hear other panelists adding to that.
I think Swapnil has clearly given us the biggest driver for network security. To give more stats to that, the year 2021 has seen increase in more than 50% of network attacks happening on your organization network. And recently WeWork has suffered a huge data breach where their internet tool, visitor internet tool, was publicly exposed over the internet, and they ended up in exposing all their visitor details to the attacker outside sitting on the public internet. Last year also, CISF database was publicly exposed over the internet, and that database didn't have any kind of authentication. And all these instances, tells you the danger of having unknown public asset and unmanaged devices which should be in your network, but unknowingly or unintentionally they are deployed on the public internet. I did a very small research last quarter where I found, more than 90,000 of most popular SRE tools that people use in their company. We seen in just the previous presentation, the guy used Prometheus. So Prometheus, Kubernetes, Docker containers, all of them are publicly exposed over the internet. They didn't have any kind of authentication. Anyone on the public internet can easily access those information. And these servers holds the crown jewels for your organization. It might contain your user data, it have server information and whatnot. So it's just like a very easy play for the attacker to grab all those things. And I think finding unknown asset or unmanaged device which should be in your network, and when you scale, all this problem become more and more real. I think dealing with this, please tell us why network security is important and why now the stakes are higher than ever before. So I think that's my view on that.
We make networking software that we sell to all kinds of enterprises, and one of the things that I've learned and noticed over the years is that the network is slowly becoming nobody's responsibility. When you go to a company, whether it's large or small, a big share of IT is on the application that they deploy. If you're a retail store, you're focused on the customer experience application. If you're a bank, you're focusing on your core banking application. If you're a hospital, you're focused on the healthcare application. So a lot of IT time and energy goes on application, cloud, the mobile extensions they are deploying. And the network's been working for the last 10 years. We've had great internet. We have 4G. We're talking of 5G. So one of the ironies of modern IT systems is that all of us take the network for granted because we're all used to high-speed access. And therefore, when you look at an enterprise IT team, very little time goes to the network. So much time goes to application and cloud. And when we were discussing the context for this panel, one of the thoughts that came to my mind is network security monitoring is one of the easiest ways to keep things secure. One of the easiest. But in cybersecurity, just like in the fashion industry or the clothing industry, there's utility and there is hype. There are simple clothes that you can wear to a conference like this, and you could also go to a very heavy-duty enterprise conference and wear expensive clothes, but both do the same thing. And in cybersecurity, it is the same thing. There's a lot of simple utility tools that you can deploy. There's also a lot of hyped up, expensive cybersecurity tools that you can deploy. And I'm glad we're talking about network monitoring, because network monitoring is one of the simplest ways to keep things secure. And that will be one of my opening observations for this panel, Dinesh.
To you. You just mentioned, simple tools are available, and that is, I could say, the lowest hanging fruit for anybody over here. So can you just sort of elaborate a bit on that?
Sure. I think one of the things that we all miss in all the hype around cybersecurity is that the network is, in a way, seeing everything. Because so much of what we do is on the network. And when you break down cybersecurity, there are three things that you really care about. Credentials, whether you call it passwords or access control, but basically credentials. The second thing is data. The data that your company has. For somebody, the data is source code. For somebody, the data is the customer credit card data, but data that your business has. And the third is resources. Your servers, your cloud. You don't want somebody to be doing mining or some form of other resource hijacking. So you've got credentials, you've got data, you've got resources, and the network is the only thing which sees all the three things. And so all the way from my friend here who does protective DNS to what you spoke about simply looking at the logs of network access you can use the simplest forms of IP tools, which I'm sure both of you will talk about, to know a lot of what is going on, what's going on, who's accessing what, are they supposed to access it, is data going out of your perimeter, and are resources being used only by you or by someone else. And I think when you guys talk about it, you can probably throw more light about how using simple tools, whether at the DNS level, at the IP routing level, at the level of who has accessed what on the network, you can still understand a lot about what's going on with security.
So, Swapnil, as far as you're concerned, you said that you have sensors in different countries and all that. So, and the sort of stuff which you have seen in terms of threats to the network. Again, how does one really analyze that data which comes in? Because we're talking about network monitoring service, which primarily means a collection of data and analyzing it. So, what sort of analysis or what do you look for when you're analyzing it in the first place, I would say?
Right. So, in the context of the threat intelligence project, what we are running, that is purely, the methodology is primarily very different from how one would put NSM in place in an enterprise network per se. But there are a lot of parallels to it. As an example, when you talk about tools, right? So one of the common, most underrated piece of open source software is, which I will highly recommend, is Zeek. So Zeek was earlier known as Bro IDS, but the misconception is that it's not an IDS. It's a passive network security monitor, which basically can function in multiple ways. Either it can, take live traffic, which might be basically packets, and then it will, kind of go through its interpreter, what it has internally, and produce a set of logs. So this is high fidelity logs, very low on disk space, which will give you the context, not only in the level of analysis, what you can do, but also the context in the level of details, what it can. So it can also do file extraction, right? So if you have threat intelligence, which you're already subscribing to, right? You can plug that, the threat intel to Zeek, and what it will do is it will tell you if it is matching any specific hash per se, in the basic form, or it will generate a DNS log, which will tell you, these are, it's actually policy neutral, but you can train it to do a lot of things. So this, aside from Zeek, there is also Suricata, which is an open source intrusion detection system as well as an IPS. So these already exist for anyone to basically incorporate in a network. So if you're running a small network, you're an MSME, you can take, in fact, last year when we did the network security monitoring track along with HasGeek, one of the things which, I talked about was packets don't lie and NSM for the masses, right? So taking a simple thing like a Raspberry Pi and putting Zeek and Suricata on it, and also doing, in a small network, instead of, from an economical standpoint, where a firewall could be a burden, the sensor could also do man in the middle by doing ARP spoofing, right? Where all the traffic from the network endpoints will actually go not to the router, it will go to the sensor, and that is where the analysis typically can happen. Of course, this is not something that will work in the context of an enterprise or a corporate network, but a hacky solution like this can be an option where, the barrier is a price, where there is a manufacturing facility and there is no security hygiene in place, right?
So, Avinash, taking your company, of course, we are like sitting in a FOSS event, and so I don't want to bring up your products into place or your services, but taking up where Swapnil left off, where do you think they could stand up against, the proprietary, I would say, solutions offered by your organization? So if when we're talking about the entry level for a company which is not technically, proficient or whatever, and need help in that area, or is, like I said earlier, low-hanging fruit, how can you sort of walk into and really monitor and, save your network from any other sort of thing, without going in for the proprietary stuff which your company does?
I think open source market is too huge to decide what exact tool that you want to build or buy, or maybe go about that. I think each and every company is now focusing towards or centric towards open source technologies. I recently studied a report from SAP Labs which says that the users of open source technology is not just increasing, but it is increasing at a very exponential growth. And when it comes to when there is a sea of open source tools, now that's become a problem for you, which is a decision making problem. What is the exact tool that you want to go about, and what is that tool which solves the problem for you, whether it is a proprietary tool or whether it is an open source tool. You need to decide whether that tool hit the target that you want to achieve, whether that tool does what you want to do. There may be a tool which does 100 things for you, but you want just a dozen of things to be done by that, and other things will be a burden for you. You have to manage those alerts, you have to manage those logs, and when there's so much of things, you have to manage. There's when there's so many things to manage, there are moment when these things go misconfigured, and you end up losing your crown jewel to the outside world. So yeah, if I have to pinpoint answer to your question, I think what matters is not you are going about proprietary tool or you are going about to open source tool, but it is more about what problem statement that you have, which you are going to solve about. Hitting the right target. You might have some edge cases which is not solved by any paid tool. You need to build your own tool to solve those edge cases. So I think it is more about what you want to solve, and then picking up the right product or picking up the right tool for you to solve that problem.
Okay. So, so can we just sort of extend his statement slightly ahead? A lot of young folks over here, practitioners, FOSS practitioners, as well as developers and all that. So I think there's a huge opportunity for them also. Like you developed some tools of yours, so as Swapnil, right? So what is the opportunity which is available to them, and how can they sort of, step in over here and help, organizations to bridge the gap? The organizations can be small or large. And I've seen even 1,000 and 2,000 crore companies having no NMS in place at all. So that's the question for you. So how can they sort of get on this opportunity and move FOSS ahead, or maybe even develop some more FOSS tools? So like you said, this is complex and is growing exponentially, and we all know that there's not a single solution. Like he said, Zeek or Silicon, it's not a single solution. You have to have a whole, I would say, suite of solutions which have to talk to each other and work with each other whenever you're putting an NMS, open source NMS setup in place, right? So where is the opportunity for these people over here?
So one of the most interesting things that we've been observing at our company level is that in the last several years, the packet filter modules in Linux have become extremely powerful. They used to be fairly simple a decade back when it was just Berkeley packet filters, but anyone looking at networking in the current kernel, you should look at the power of the new eBPF that they have. And you can now do lots of things at a network level in the new Linux kernel without compromising performance, without compromising security, and you can really build some effective tools. So one thing I'd certainly like everybody to check out is the sheer advancement that the eBPF modules have made in the kernel, and the set of tools available once you can master that area. So you can really develop effective networking monitoring tools at no cost by using this ecosystem. It's powerful, it's fast, and it's free. So I think that's one thing that we are keeping a close eye on in our company, the advancements in the eBPF ecosystem, and I think there was a session as well as on the list. So that could be extremely interesting to look at if you are looking at Linux networking recently.
So can we just take, we got about 10 minutes left. Am I right? 10 minutes? So we'll do a quick this thing. Where does one start? So you talked about sensors, you talked about the whole suite of tools. You talked about the product which you are doing. So where does one start if I am starting to say I'm starting from scratch, I have to just put up an NMS system. So what do I start looking at? Do I look at my server? Do I look at the traffic? Do I look at the IDS, IPS? I don't have it. I don't have an IDS, IPS. I don't have a firewall, for example. What do I do?
Yeah.
And there are companies like that. I'm sure if we walk out and we throw a stone, we'd hit hundreds of such companies who have nothing in place except maybe, like you said, crown jewel. There's a crown jewel in one system, and he doesn't even know that, it's not protected. He just switches it off and he thinks he's going home free. So where does one start today?
I think the first place we've seen that you can make an effective start is just understanding the network access pattern, because securities, it's such a broad landscape. Some attacks could be relevant to your organization, some attacks
Sir,
could not be.
I don't know security. I don't know my network also. I just know I have one guy who comes and does my systems, I'm a shop here.
Yeah.
5 machines.
Yeah, but I think the first place to start would just be knowing who's on your network. And I think that's simple enough that if you have 5 people, somebody shouldn't be using your guest Wi-Fi. So just knowing who's on your network is the simplest place to start.
Great. Vinash, where does one start?
I think in my experience, what I've experienced that as I started, asset monitoring, asset discovery is something which people doesn't do, and they end up finding that their server, which should be in their VPN, is now publicly exposed over the internet. I think firstly, asset discovery to find out what all assets are running, because until as you do not find what all running, how will you protect them? How will you secure them? So the first and foremost is to discover what all running inside your network, and then finding out ways, what are the top crown jewel for you to protect, and then going into, not into, we have recently heard a concept of defense of depth, but here what we apply is defense of breadth. You have to go horizontally, you have to go on a horizontal scale to find what all being running, not in the depth, but on a breadth side. I think first, the foremost thing that, even startups should start with is doing effective monitoring and discovery of their own assets.
Okay. So Neil, what about you?
So I'm going to possibly, give a different, the answer on a different tangent. And the basis for that is primarily serving MSMEs, and one of the learning is primarily ignorance, lack of a security hygiene. As you rightly pointed out, there is no firewall. How do you make someone understand that you need to look at network data per se, right? So unfortunately, unless and until an incident has happened, organizations or manufacturing companies, say for example, in our case, do not necessarily pay attention to whatever is happening in the network, right? So the accountability ownership is a problem. So I would say the change of mindset would be the first thing to look at, where organizations are looking at not only within their network, but holistically what are the sort of problems that can impact them, right? And the other side of things is on the level of then how do you build capacity building with respect to technology and otherwise. But the prevention ultimately fails mindset is my line of thinking, which I would urge people to look at, because embracing the hack, right? There is an excellent talk by Haroon, who is the founder of Things Canary. They make the honeypots, and it's titled "Embracing the Hack," where breaches happen all the time. Having defenses which is going to be preventing every sort of attack, and especially when you take attacks like insider threats, right? There is so much complexity where technology might not be a solution, where data exfiltration might be happening. So that change in mindset, I think, would be the first starting point in my opinion.
Great. So I think what we'll do is I'll sort of sum up, and if we have any questions, anyone over here, feel free to ask. Any questions? I would like to just put in a word, for the young folks out here, based on my experience. Okay, that's first thing, from what you guys have said. Ignorance, yes, very big. It's a very big thing around the whole country. And the opportunity for all of you guys is simply speaking to go and, educate the person who calls you in. One piece of advice over here is please don't go and talk tech. Don't talk technology, just talk plain and simple common sense. You've not done this, this is what can happen. If you have a hole over here, please don't walk around the hole, put something on that, don't walk into the hole, simple. No, don't tell them that, okay, this hole is 5 feet deep, it's a black one, and it's got, you can put cement and concrete over here, cover it up, nothing like that. So don't show them what tools you've got, don't carry this, just go with a phone in your hand. And uncle, auntie, please, this is what you should do. And I'll tell you an experience, this is about a month-old experience. It's a listed company. They had a hack, email compromise attack. They lost $200,000. Somebody, of course, man in the middle, and email was compromised. The payment went off to some place in Hungary and China. And he called me to do an investigation. So first I asked him, logs kuch hai kya? He says, nothing. Then I asked him, okay, your email system is on what? He says, I don't know, but let me check. So it turns out it's on Google, and he's got some other company who's managing that Google account for him. They create accounts and they do this and that. So of course, Google means you can't get anything out of there. And then he asked me, I said, okay, I said, the only thing which I can do is I can see the trail and tell you what happened. So if you give me the emails of the last 6 months or so, we'll find out when it went wrong. And this will cost you X thousand rupees. And he says, oh my God, that's too much. I said, you lost $2 lakh, and I'm asking you for maybe $1 lakh or 2 lakhs, that's all. And I'm going to spend about 5 days to go through about 5,000 emails. So that's the only thing which I can ask you. He says, no, it's too much, and let me talk to my papa. So this gentleman whom I was speaking to, by the way, he was a 55-year-old guy, and he wanted to talk to his papa. So he talks to his papa and says, I've got this guy over here, and he's much older than I thought he would be. So he thought some 20-year-old would come and do his work for him. But that's another story. And then he says, I want you to also look at my systems and do things after that. Okay, fine, I'll send you a proposal. Well, that proposal went to him, he's still sitting on it, and I asked him twice, kuch karna hai? He said, nahi, yaar, abhi to ho gaya, it's gone. So that's the unfortunate attitude of people. And so what we have to do is when you go and, even if you are speaking, I would say, plain speak, and not geek speak. I don't speak geek speak, so I speak plain speak. You have to be very much more, I would say, simple than what I sort of put out to him. But coming to what we just heard over here, it is a priority. Network is what, it's right there. Everything sits on the network. Network is compromised, like he said, the credentials. That's the primary thing which is compromised by anybody before anybody can take. Whatever we may say that, okay, I've hacked this guy or I hacked that guy, nowadays you can't brute force into something. So you have to, break open somebody's system or credentials or something like that. Or you may be very lucky to get somebody's AWS, which is like out of the open or something, or Azure, I would say. But that's how it is. So the big question is, does it really matter? Does network security monitoring really matter? The answer in a very simple thing is yes. And it matters more than anything else. If you don't monitor your network, and like he said, if you don't know your assets, that is the first thing which you will do when you go into monitoring a network, to at least know what you have. It's an old saying which says that you can't manage what you can't monitor, what you don't know if you have it. If I don't know what assets I have, I can't manage those assets in any which way. The second thing is, it's not difficult to implement. And like we just heard, there are tools available. And even somebody who doesn't know technology can put tools in place, because everybody in today's day and age is using an app or somehow or the other, whether he is technically challenged or technically superior. But the opportunity for all of you guys over here is to, let us say, maybe you can build a suite of open source tools and put it as a package. So makes the life for your client very much more easy, and that okay, there is this suite, and you can install that and it'll do this for you. Or maybe somebody can set up a managed security service which has this suite of tools. And would it blow a hole in your client or your the other person's pocket? I don't think it would blow a hole, because all that would be charged by you would be your own time, your own effort, not the cost of the software, because it's open source. which is the beauty over there. And it gives, I think it gives everybody an opportunity to develop something also, a tool or a solution, which you can put out in the market also today. And not just, I would say, open source standalone, but there are, all these proprietary systems, even like the Microsoft proprietary systems, everyone has an ecosystem of add-ons and, solutions which are there, which can be again built and add service over there. So these are things, and again, back to you guys. Questions for that panel over here, doubts which you may have, you may like to ask. No? So we still have time. Maybe we'll start talking among ourselves again. So some more. We can add some more gyan for people over here. You want to talk proprietary stuff? No.
Yeah, I think when you said about people have to teach security, I think, and even Swapnil said that you need to aware people about security. What I have experienced, you cannot teach security. You have to change their behavior. By teaching security, people say that you run a security campaign in your company and you will change the culture. No, it doesn't work like that. You have to change the behavior of your employees. You have to change the behavior of of the citizens, and then it becomes the culture. I think that's what I want to just add into how security awareness should work. Traditionally, people believe that we will give training sessions, it will change their habits. But again, you have to change their behavior. You have to give them, if you say to them that do not share passwords in plain text, until unless you do not give them alternatives, how they will find the substitute for that. You have to develop tools for them and say that use this rather than pasting your plain text password here and there. So you have to change their habit, their behavior, and that behavior becomes the culture of of your company.
So the one thing that I'd like to add in the, especially in the context of the certain directives, is it talks about emphasis on only logs, right? But when you look at the network security monitoring principle, logs is just one element of it. It is not, network security data can be many things, right? It can also be something like net flow. It can be a full packet capture, which is definitely not feasible. But in certain cases, when you're doing incident response, you would want to do that, right? Or it could be something like Zeek, as I mentioned earlier. So, and even in the case of NetFlow, even though the context is not going to be in that data, it's going to be purely source IP address, destination IP address, and only that much, not much metadata to it. That can still be a source of your, historical data which you can use for doing incident response or threat hunting.
Right. Yeah.
Even though we're talking about enterprises and MSMEs and all that, one of the things that I've observed is that India as a country is becoming conscious of both the power of the internet to connect people and the power of the internet to disrupt everything that we know. A lot of you have seen so much happening under Make in India. We are a startup under Make in India. And one of the things that I'm noticing increasingly is that we are becoming aware as a country that we need to build this stuff, whether it's software or hardware, because like we've been discussing, the network is your friend or enemy depending on how much control you have on the network. So this is going to become very important for us, not just from an enterprise business angle. It's going to be important for us as a country itself, because we can protect our assets only if we can protect the network. So this is going to be much bigger in the coming years.
I'd like to add another thing over here. See, it's in the cloud, or we talk about network. We talked about it earlier that people think it's just not it's my responsibility. It's not my responsibility. The IT guy thinks it's somebody else's responsibility. And in the cloud, it's all the more complicated because we talked about shared responsibility and stuff like that. And like what you mentioned just now. So it's, when we talk about the national scene, I do a little bit of work on the national side of it. It's again everybody's responsibility. You can't say that I am You mentioned a client of yours, right, who said that I got hacked, so what? Right? But it's like every small and large company basically contributes to the economy in some way. So it is also a small cog anywhere, any place, which may be a cause for a larger disruption.
Yeah.
So which is what we have to sort of realize. And when you talked about the logs on the CERT thing, I don't want to go into that because I have very, very strong opinions over there. But if we just talk about the log part of it, I have large and small companies. I think I told you about 80% of the companies where I'm consulting with, they don't even have anything like this client I just talked about. They have nothing in place. Forget logs, So the thing is that if you don't have logs, and then when you get something goes wrong, you go to the cops. What's going to happen? Nothing's going to happen over there. You're going to pay money and then come out from there. And but what has gone wrong? People need to know. It's like the sensors you put up. You need to know what sort of attacks are happening in this zone and why are they hacking. That in the larger interest of the country becomes very important. And that's where the CERT directives sort of come into play. That if you guys are not doing anything at all, now you better start doing it. Because every single standard and every single regulation says it. Now, the earlier company which had the email compromise is a listed company. SEBI guidelines categorically states that you have to have XYZ in place, and there's nothing over there, and this guy is getting away with blue murder. So, is it a crime what he has done? I think it is a crime. He may not think it's a crime. He may say that I have been, I'm a victim. I'm not a criminal. But that is where, as a security, thought process, things have to move in that manner. Like you said, the cultural change has to come in. You should start thinking in those ways. It's like we never used to buy insurance. When you go to our parents, and if the LIC guy would come home and बोले हम मर रहे हैं क्या? तू हमारे को माय बेचने के लिए आया. It's like the grim reaper coming to your house trying to give you insurance. You're going to die tomorrow. You better buy insurance today. And then when you go out, you had an accident, and you go and tell the grim reaper, hey, give me the medical, accident insurance one day previous date. So one has to sort of change in the same manner. Today we buy insurance. Everybody is buying insurance. It's not thinking that, okay, it's somebody's got a Kali Billi ka rasta kaat gayi type of thing issue or whatever. So again, asking you guys, any questions before we close down? No.
A couple of questions.
There are questions? Okay, sir. Please go ahead.
Hi. So network traffic is something which is ever changing. You'll have new protocols coming up, and the traffic patterns which you analyze might keep on changing. There are methods you can use, NetFlow and everything. I have tried it on my side projects, but how do enterprises tackle this? Like patterns of network traffic keeps on changing. People will come up with something new to overcome your firewall rules or overcome your deep packet inspection flows. How do you keep adapting to these?
I think it's a continuous process, right? I mean, when you take a sample data like NetFlow in your case, the data set that belongs to your network is going to be very different from the NetFlow that I'm running in my network, right? It's going to be very subjective, context specific to what I'm running. Say, for example, I'm running an on-prem email server. There are going to be a lot of DNS requests for an MX record, right? Which probably, if you're not running an on-prem, you're not going to see that, right? So the anomalies that you draw out of it, the patterns that you create out of it, is the first phase is definitely the collection. So you're also absolutely on the right track where you're collecting that sort of data. Then comes the analysis phase, right, in network security monitoring. And there are a lot of, again, tools available, open source, which can provide you the context, right, or ingestion of that data can be done inside something like an ELK stack, where you do analysis at a much more larger data set. So it's going to be very specific to a network. There is not going to be a kind of an answer which is going to be turn on this specific switch and you get the output, you get the answer.
Another question.
I know you mentioned you didn't want to go into the certain logs issue specifically, but you did mention that there are systemic problems in this space that people could be doing more, whether they're clients of yours you work with and others. So I was just curious if one was to challenge, members of the panel to one thing specifically that you would want to see coming, whether it's in, say, revised versions of CERT's directions or from, let's say, the central government on cybersecurity more generally. What's the one thing as network security practitioners that you're interested in seeing, or that you think government has a role in asking private sector or network security practitioners to do more of? So I'm essentially saying, if you had a chance to redraft that, not just logs, anything else, if you were to see one thing coming down the pipe this year or next year from the government in particular, whether it could also be just about enforcing previous rules, is there one thing that you all individually would like to see?
So I think recently when CERT-In has their new regulation passed, it had numerous things which we can never think of that it will be coming so soon and will be forcefully established on the companies. ClearTrip recently had a data breach, and it becomes the first company to follow the new regulation, rules of and guidelines of Indian CERT. In coming time, what I see, everything basically revolves around even the incident reporting of from incident reporting rules of CERT-In, where they say that you need to report within 6 hours of data breach. All of that will make only sense when you know who has done what and what has been done. So having your audit logs at at every point of time will be able to answer what actually happened to your system. So whether something said doing some incident reporting and collecting logs, all of those will only make sense when you have the correct audit logs, which tells you what happened to your system, who has done, and when it happened. So I think that would probably be something critical coming up in some time.
I'd just like to add to that is because there's a cybersecurity strategy which is currently it's cooking. Like जैसे प्रेशर कुकर में है तो अभी 5 सीटी 6 सीटी हो चुके हैं, तो अभी 1-2 सीटी और आना है. We don't know how many सीटी have to come. It'll happen. Then there is a privacy bill which is also hanging fire, right? There is right now there are talks about the IT Act being repealed or not repealed, sorry, being reviewed, and so these are the three main things which are happening. There's a Data Protection Act which is also being discussed, and these are all things which should have happened maybe 100 years back, which have not happened as yet. That is the reason why we are sitting here and discussing certain things, and the whole country gets perturbed about the certain directions, unfortunately. But if these had been in the law, nobody would have even sat up and questioned. So it's like the regulatory, because the regulatory bodies which are there like SEBI and RBI and all that, they don't have a judicial authority. SEBI can say, ye karoge aap, but SEBI can't take you to jail. IT Act can take you to jail. That is the issue. So DPA, the Data Protection Act or the Privacy Bill, these can take you to jail. Because if you have not got logs at the right time, at the wrong place, and then that is what it is. So I don't think we can take any more questions. We're just 4 seconds away, and we only have time to say bye to you. The summation somebody was done earlier. So thank you very much, everybody. And questions, of course, we are all around, we are available and can surely continue this.